fast, where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to roll-out facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast, where we cut through dairy industry noise to get you the insights that actually matter for your operation.
And today we are doing a deep dive into a feature piece about the Ciudad Juárez border blockades, the $1.45 billion in frozen exports, and the hidden pipeline risks that are completely blindsiding your milk check.
Right, and I want to set the scene right away because the calendar is incredibly important for this deep dive. Today is March 6, 2026. If you're listening to this on the tractor right now, you have exactly 2 weeks. 2 weeks before a massive coordinated national mobilization is planned to hit Mexico on March 20.
Yeah, and we need to be clear here. This isn't a rumor floating around the local coffee shop. It is a scheduled event that threatens to repeat the absolute devastation of the November 2025 mega blockades that we all just lived through.
Exactly. And we need to talk about what that actually means for your farm, because I am looking at the stakes right now, and they are entirely disconnected from what producers see on a future screen.
That is the core disconnect we really have to unpack today. You know, you might be sitting there at the farm desk staring at your screen and hedging your prices perfectly. You are doing everything by the book to protect your margin against market crashes.
You're paying the premiums.
Right, you're paying the premiums. But your actual mailbox check, the physical money deposited into your account that you use to pay the feed mill, pay your labor, service your debt, that check is quietly shrinking. This deep dive is entirely about the massive gap between that digital screen and your physical mailbox.
Because it's about how the dairy industry's so-called most reliable customer actually relies on the most unreliable high beta transit corridor in North America.
Hold on, let's stop right there. High beta transit corridor. You are throwing stock market trader talk at me before we have even gotten out to the barn. Let's translate that for the guy milking cows right now. What do you actually mean by a high beta transit corridor?
Fair point. So, in the finance world, beta is a metric used to measure volatility. If a stock has a high beta, it means it swings wildly compared to the rest of the market. High risk, high reward.
Okay, so a wild ride, basically.
Yeah, exactly. A wild ride. So when I say we're relying on a high beta transit corridor, I mean the physical road and bridge infrastructure between the U.S. and Mexico is incredibly volatile. It is prone to sudden violent disruptions. You're shipping a highly perishable product, fluid milk, fresh cheese, down a pipeline that can literally be changed shut overnight.
Okay, that makes total sense. It's like trying to ride a mechanical bull instead of a carousel, but you don't actually know when the bull is going to get turned on.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
Let's look at the baseline problem here, which I think we can call the illusion of price hedging. I was looking at the numbers from the source material we pulled for this. Let's review the tape. December 2025 Class 3 settled at $15.86 per hundredweight.
Right.
Then January dropped to $14.59. According to the Dairy Star, that was the lowest since July 2023. Now, if I am a producer, those are normal, albeit frustrating price moves.
Yeah, it's cyclical.
It's cyclical, and it is exactly the kind of volatility my hedge is built to handle. I buy a dairy revenue protection endorsement, I use the tools, and I cover that drop. My broker tells me I am safe, so why shouldn't I sleep well at night?
Because your broker is only managing your price risk. They are not managing your pipe risk.
Let's look at the physical reality of what happened to the U.S. average mailbox price back in October 2025. It drops 85 cents in a single month, down to $18.70 per hundredweight.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch is right. That was a massive $5.58 below the prior year. And as we moved into late 2025, we saw a staggering $1.30 per hundredweight national gap between the statistical all milk price and what farmers actually received.
So the all milk price says one thing, but the check in the mail says something completely different. Exactly. Your hedge protected you from the Class 3 drop on the board, sure, but it did absolutely nothing to protect you from that $1.30 gap that eroded your actual physical cash flow.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here representing the skeptical listener. If I am paying good money for a DRP endorsement, I am paying to protect my margin. Oh, telling me that insurance policy is completely useless if a bridge gets shut down?
It is not useless for the broader market, but it does absolutely nothing for local basis blowouts caused by physical logistics. There is a fundamental difference between price risk and pipe risk. A hedge tool protects you against the Chicago Mercantile Exchange taking a dive, but there is no ticker symbol on the CME for physical supply chain paralysis.
Right. You can't buy a put option on a traffic jam.
Exactly, you can't. There is no insurance policy that pays out when a bridge 1,500 miles away in Ciudad Juárez is chained shut by protesters.
So mechanically, how does a blocked bridge in Mexico steal money out of a mailbox check in Wisconsin or Texas? Walk me through the actual plumbing of how that loss travels backward up the supply chain.
This is the harsh reality of how basis risk gets passed down the chain directly to the producer. Let's think about how your co-op operates when the physical pipes jam. Let's say your co-op has millions of pounds of milk or finished powder destined for Mexico. Suddenly, the border closes.
The door is shut.
The door is shut. The Class 3 price on the board stays exactly the same. The market hasn't technically crashed, but your co-op suddenly has a massive, expensive logistical nightmare on its hands. They have product they cannot deliver. They have trucks parked in the desert, racking up demurrage fees.
Which is essentially a penalty charge for keeping a freight truck waiting, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because the trucker is sitting there burning diesel to run the reefer unit to keep the product cold, and they aren't getting paid for making a delivery. They are just a parking lot on wheels.
So the demurrage fees skyrocket. The co-op is forced to either fire sale highly perishable milk into lower value domestic channels, or they have to pay plants overtime to turn it into powder and store it in warehouses that are already completely full.
And the co-op's margin gets violently squeezed. And what we know about co-ops, and I say this as someone who has sat through a lot of co-op board meetings, is that when they panic and bleed cash, they don't just eat that loss.
No, they socialize it.
They socialize it. They
Oh.
pull the levers they actually have control over on your milk check. They look at your milk check and they start making adjustments. They slash your export premiums. They cut quality incentives that you normally hit with ease.
Or they implement over-based pricing penalties.
Yes, exactly. Essentially punishing you for producing your normal amount of milk because they suddenly have too much milk locally. Even though nothing changed on your farm, the pipe just broke. Suddenly your basis, that difference between the board price and your mailbox price, just blows out.
So the hedge did its job on the digital screen, but I still lost a small fortune because the pipe broke. I can see why producers are incredibly frustrated. You do the work, you hire the risk advisors, you pay the premiums, you lock in your margin, and you still end up short on cash to pay for silage because of a traffic jam in Ciudad Juárez.
We really have to stop looking at the dairy industry purely through the lens of price and start looking at it through the lens of infrastructure. And to do that, we need to do a reality check on a very popular industry narrative. Let's talk about the anatomy of a mega blockade and contrast the boardroom narrative with the reality on the ground.
I am really glad you brought this up. In the source material, there is a reference to a CoBank report from December 2024.
Yeah.
The title of the report was, literally, Mexico has become America's most reliable dairy customer.
I remember that one.
Yeah, and the numbers they cited to back that up are frankly massive.
Uh-huh.
Mexico takes 4.5% of total U.S. milk production. They account for more than 1/4 of the total U.S. dairy export value. We export 1.38 billion pounds of milk solids down there. They are covering 80% of their entire dairy deficit with our milk.
On paper, if you are looking at a spreadsheet in a corporate office in Chicago or Washington, D.C., that looks like the textbook definition of reliable. It looks like an incredible success story of exports going up and to the right year after year. But let's look at the physical reality just a few weeks after that report came out. November 23 and 24, 2025. The mega blockade.
Okay, so the math looks great on a spreadsheet, but you were looking at the actual ground reports from last November. What actually happens when that spreadsheet collides with thousands of angry protesters?
It is total paralysis. You had massive farmer and trucker groups, specifically the National Front for the Rescue of Mexican Farmland, which goes by the acronym FNRCM. You had the National Association of Carriers, known as ANTAC, and the Movimiento Agrícola Campesino, or MA. They launched coordinated blockades before dawn.
Let me stop you there because that is a lot of alphabet soup. Who actually are these people on the ground? Are we talking about a dozen guys with picket signs, or is this a massive operation?
This is a massive, highly organized operation. We are talking about thousands of domestic Mexican farmers, commercial truck drivers, and agricultural workers. And the scale of what they achieved was unprecedented. They didn't just stand on a sidewalk. They shut down major federal highways and physically occupied international customs facilities in at least 17 different states across Mexico.
Oh, 17 states.
Yes. They systematically targeted the main commercial corridors in Chihuahua, Sinaloa, Zacatecas, and the arterial routes radiating out of Mexico City.
I remember reading the FreightWaves report about the Ciudad Juárez to El Paso crossing, which is Mexico's busiest commercial border zone. They reported there were 38,000 trucks stranded. I want everyone listening to just try and picture that.
Yeah.
38,000 commercial trucks. That isn't a traffic jam. That is a newly formed city of stranded metal.
Just idling in the heat.
Yes, you have drivers sitting in the cab of their truck in the desert sun. Behind them is a tanker full of highly perishable fluid milk, or a reefer full of fresh cheese. They can't go forward because there are literal tractors chained together on the bridge, and they can't go backward because there are 10,000 trucks behind them. That milk is literally ticking like a clock.
And that ticking clock translates to instant financial bleeding. The source material calculates that the industry losses hit $25.8 million per hour. Maquiladora plants across the border, these are the massive manufacturing hubs that build everything from car parts to electronics. They went into technical stoppages because they simply didn't have parts arriving.
They just sent people home.
Yeah, 30,000 manufacturing workers were sent home to sit idle. But here is the critical data point for the dairy farmer listening to this right now. Dairy was the very first product to run short in Mexico.
I was reading through the notes here, and it mentioned something about local businesses in Juarez hitting a wall instantly. How fast did things actually shut down there for the grocery stores and distributors?
Almost immediately. Ivan Perez Ruiz, the president of the Juarez Chamber of Commerce, actually went on the record and stated that the blockades nearly resulted in a complete shortage of dairy products. Milk and cheese were the most impacted goods in the entire supply chain.
More than anything else.
More than anything else. Maria Teresa Delgado Zarate from Index Juarez estimated the daily export losses at $250 million across all sectors. Manuel Sotelo Suarez, who represents the trucking sector, warned the city was very close to running out of basic supplies entirely.
You really have to understand the physical nature of what we produce. You can park a truck full of steel auto parts in the desert for a week. The steel doesn't care. It is fine. You cannot park a tanker of fluid milk in the desert for a week. The entire dairy export model relies on high-velocity transit. If the wheels stop turning, the product dies.
Now, as an impartial deep dive, we need to look at the root causes of this without taking sides, because understanding the why is crucial to understanding the actual ongoing risk to your farm. This isn't just random vandalism. The Mexican groups organizing these blockades are protesting over real, potent, deeply felt issues in their country.
They have legitimate grievances from their perspective.
Right, exactly. They are demanding higher basic grain prices for their domestic growers. They are actively opposing changes to Mexico's general water law, which affects their irrigation rights. They are marching for what they term food sovereignty, essentially arguing that Mexico shouldn't be so heavily reliant on U.S. imports for its basic caloric needs.
Right. And in October 2025, the leader of FNRCM publicly alleged that the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and transnational grain companies were actively manipulating markets to hurt the Mexican farmer.
Exactly. Now, as the source notes, there wasn't specific evidence provided to support that claim of direct market manipulation by the CME, but frankly, the empirical validity of their political claim almost doesn't matter to your milk check.
What do you mean it doesn't matter? If they're protesting over something that isn't technically true, shouldn't the government just clear them out?
Whether you or I agree with their politics or whether their economic theory holds water is completely irrelevant to the flow of milk. What matters is that these grievances are potent enough to mobilize tens of thousands of people to park heavy machinery on international bridges. These are real, visceral political forces capable of completely paralyzing North American infrastructure. They have learned that the border choke points are their most effective leverage. They are using your milk trucks as a deliberate negotiating tool against their own government.
Which brings us to the absolute most painful part of this deep dive, the actual barn math. We need to follow the money from that paralyzed bridge in Juarez straight back to the farm's cash flow, because this is where the theoretical talk of basis risk turns into the physical reality of missing a payment to the feed mill. Let's do some simple barn math. I want to look at the baseline economics we are dealing with right now.
Let's lay out the baseline. According to dairy economist Bill Brooks of Stoneheart, consulting the estimated 2026 income over feed cost, what we call the IOFC, is sitting at just $10.14 per hundredweight. According to the Dairy Star, that is down $2.30 from 2025.
So right out of the gate, before a single protester even thinks about walking onto a bridge, the margin cushion on the farm is already incredibly thin. $10.14 over feed cost does not leave a lot of room for error when you factor in labor, fuel, equipment repairs, and debt service.
It is razor thin. And then you add in that $1.30 per hundredweight national gap between the all-milk price and actual farmer receipts that we discussed earlier, which FarmShine's Sherry Bunting documented extensively.
Let's pause on that gap. You mentioned depooling in component math earlier when we were talking about co-op deductions. That jargon gets thrown around at co-op meetings all the time, and half the room falls asleep. Explain mechanically how things like depooling widen that gap even before a crisis hits.
Depooling happens when a milk handler or a co-op decides to pull their milk out of the federal milk marketing order pool because the advanced prices of Class C fluid milk or Class 2 are actually lower than the manufacturing classes like Class 3 cheese. They keep that extra value for themselves rather than sharing it with the whole pool.
Right, they protect their own bottom line.
Yes, they protect the house. Component math gets tricky because if they're forced to dump milk or downgrade it from a high-value cheese class to a low-value powder class, the value of your butter fat and protein gets diluted in their internal accounting. So that $1.30 gap is already eating into your $10.14 margin. But when a blockade hits, that gap blows out even further because the co-op suddenly has millions of dollars in unexpected logistical losses they have to cover.
Let's slow this down and walk through the exact math of a 30-day blockade backlog. I want everyone listening to picture their own bulk tank right now and apply these numbers to their operation.
All right, let's say your co-op's effective pay price ends up running 40 cents per hundredweight below what your hedge implied for 30 days. They justify this because they had to reroute milk, dump product into lower classes, and eat massive freight penalties.
40 cents doesn't sound like a catastrophic number on paper to someone outside the industry.
It doesn't, until you scale it up to the size of a modern dairy. If you are running a 700-cow herd and you are shipping roughly 560 hundredweight a day, that 40-cent hit over 30 days translates to a $6,720 loss. Just vanished from your check.
And if you were running a 1,200 cow herd?
If you were running a 1,200 cow herd shipping 960 hundredweight a day, that exact same 40-cent scenario costs you $11,520. And if you have a 2,400 cow dairy, you are looking at a $23,000 surprise deduction over a single month.
With an income over feed cost already incredibly tight at $10.14, an $11,000 or $23,000 surprise hit isn't just a minor annoyance. That is a tractor payment gone because of a traffic jam 1,000 miles away. It is the difference between making payroll comfortably and scrambling. It's the difference between paying the feed mill on time to keep your discounts and having a very uncomfortable, sweaty conversation with your agricultural lender.
Absolutely.
And to me, the most insidious part is how the co-op actually pulls that money out of your account. They don't send you a transparent line item on your statement that says Juárez blockade penalty deduction.
No, the extraction is completely opaque. You just look at your check and notice the export premiums you usually rely on are suddenly gone. The quality incentives you usually hit because you have great somatic cell counts are suddenly structured differently or reduced.
They move the goalposts.
They absolutely move the goalposts. They might invoke a harsh overbase pricing penalty, telling you that anything you produced over your historical average is going to be paid at an abysmal salvage rate. They use the complex pricing levers already built into your existing contract to socialize the pain of the closed pipe.
Okay, so let's dig into the physical logistics of that pain. I want to talk about what actually happens to the physical milk when the bridge closes, because this case study in logistics really exposes why the co-ops bleed so much cash so quickly. When Juárez shuts down the processing plants in the U.S., don't just stop receiving milk from the farm. The cows keep milking. You can't turn a Holstein off like a faucet. So what does the plant actually do with the milk?
The plants go into immediate scramble mode. They have incoming milk from the farms, and they have outgoing product that suddenly has nowhere to go. Their first instinct is to try to reroute the loads hundreds of miles out of the way to cross at different ports of entry like Nogales in Arizona or Nuevo Laredo in Texas.
But I'm guessing they aren't the only ones with that brilliant idea, right?
Exactly. Every single industry, auto parts, electronics, produce, they are all trying to reroute through those exact same secondary ports. So those ports instantly get jammed up too. The infrastructure simply cannot handle the diverted volume. If the milk can't cross anywhere, that highly perishable product has to be shoved into lower value domestic channels.
So they fire up the dryers.
Yeah, they might have to run the dryers at maximum capacity, paying triple overtime to the staff just to turn fluid milk into milk powder so they can safely store it. And they do this hoping that the buyers in Mexico will wait out the strike and buy it later. All of this adds massive freight costs, emergency processing costs, and immense inventory holding costs.
And the friction doesn't magically end the minute the protesters go home, does it? The source material points out that even after a blockades call, the bleeding continues.
Far from it. The source notes that even after a truce was called, like the one Mexico's Interior Minister Rosa Isela Rodriguez managed to negotiate on November 27, shippers were told to expect 10 or more days of severe delays just to clear the physical backlog. It takes weeks to unspool a logistical knot of 38,000 trucks.
And we absolutely cannot ignore the physical danger of rerouting this product. This isn't just about drawing a new line on a map. You are sending truckers on massive detours through areas with severe life-threatening security risks.
The security aspect is terrifying. The source cites a report from El País stating there are 8,000 cargo robberies per year in Mexico. That averages out to 21 a day, and over 80% of those involve violence against the driver. ANTAC, the Carriers Association we mentioned earlier, claims the real number is actually somewhere between 54 to 70 major thefts daily because so many of them go entirely unreported to corrupt local authorities.
So the official stats are just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. CONCAMIN, the Industrial Chambers Confederation, estimates cargo theft costs the Mexican economy around 15 million pesos per day.
So put yourself in the shoes of that logistics manager at the co-op. You are trying to reroute a highly perishable, highly valuable product through rural territories with some of the highest cargo theft rates in the world, on roads that weren't designed for this kind of volume, driven by drivers who know they are targets. It is an absolute logistical nightmare. And every single ounce of that inefficiency, every security surcharge, every lost load ultimately gets deducted from your milk check.
Which brings us to the collision course we are on right now. We mentioned at the very top of this deep dive that today is March 6, 2026. 2 weeks from now, on March 20, FNRCM and ANTAC have called a massive national mobilization. This was widely reported by UNO TV and confirmed by MexicoBusiness.news. Additionally, the CNTE Teachers Union is striking from March 18 to March 20.
It is a coordinated effort.
It is a planned action. It's a scheduled, heavily publicized event, and it is entirely tied to the looming July 1st, 2026 USMCA joint review.
This is a huge pivot point for the industry. This is where the border transitions from being just a logistical checkpoint where you show your paperwork to a strategic geopolitical choke point. Break down this USMCA review for us neutrally. What are the two sides actually fighting for here?
Under Article 34.7 of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the pact has to undergo a formal joint review this July. And we have two incredibly powerful, totally opposing forces colliding head-on. On one side, you have the U.S. agricultural lobby. More than 120 U.S. agricultural groups, including massive players like the National Milk Producers Federation and the U.S. Dairy Export Council, have drawn a line in the sand.
And what are they asking for?
They want the USMCA extended with minimal structural changes, but they are demanding strict enforcement of market access commitment.
Because they have billions of dollars riding on those commitments, right?
Right. Exactly. They are desperately trying to protect the $8 billion in new dairy processing capacity that is currently coming online across the U.S. That massive expansion in processing was built almost entirely on the assumption that those exports to Mexico would continue to flow unimpeded.
And on the other side of the table, what do the Mexican farm movement actually want out of this July 1 review?
Neutrally speaking, the Mexican farm movements, led by groups like Mexico Solidarity, are treating this as an existential fight. They are calling this upcoming protest a mobilization for food sovereignty and agricultural transformation. They are explicitly demanding that basic grains and essential agricultural products be removed from the USMCA entirely.
They want to protect their own farmers.
Right. They want the right to protect their domestic markets with tariffs and quotas that the USMCA currently forbids. They are treating the July 1 review as a critical pressure point, and they have realized that parking trucks on the international bridges is the absolute most effective leverage they have to force their government's hand.
So these blockades are no longer a one-off tantrum over a local water dispute. They are a deliberate, scheduled negotiating tool being used on a continental scale, which leads to a really contrarian take that I think we need to discuss because it goes against everything I have heard at every dairy conference for the last decade.
I know exactly where you were going with this.
Yep.
In the dairy industry, we have been fed this relentless narrative for 10 years that exports going up and to the right is inherently and purely good for the farmer. Co-op executives brag about their export volumes at every single annual member meeting. They show the bar charts, everyone claps, and they say they are feeding the world.
Right, it's the ultimate feel-good slide in the PowerPoint presentation.
Exactly. But we need to stop blindly blaming the market for our margin compression and start seriously questioning the pipe.
Yes. The contrarian view here is that extreme reliance on one single massive buyer is a massive, totally unpriced vulnerability. We established that Mexico covers 80% of its massive dairy deficit with U.S. milk, and almost all of that physical volume is concentrated through just a handful of bridges: FAR, Laredo, Juárez, and Nogales.
If a co-op boasts about Mexican export dominance but has absolutely zero contingency plan for when those specific bridges close, if their only plan is to dump milk and socialize the loss, they aren't just being optimistic, they are being negligent. They are passing existential basis risk directly to you, the producer, without compensating you for taking on that risk.
It feels like the entire industry has been completely blinded by demand. We see the consumption numbers in Mexico going up, the middle class growing, more pizza being eaten, and we completely ignore the extreme fragility of the physical supply chain required to fulfill that demand. I hedge my milk prices on the CME because I know the market is volatile. But by signing with a heavily export-dependent co-op, I am leaving my farm completely exposed to the physical volatility of 4 concrete bridges over the Rio Grande.
That is the exact paradox. You lock the front door of your farm with a price hedge, but you leave the back door wide open to supply chain chaos.
All right, so let's get incredibly practical here. A dairy farmer is listening to this. They just finished their morning milking, they are driving the pickup to the feed store, and their head is absolutely spinning with basis gaps, geopolitical blockades, and high beta corridors. What are the specific actionable things they need to remember and act on from today's deep dive? The source material lays out 4 clear paths for the farm, broken down into immediate, medium-term, and long-term positioning. Let's start with path 1. The 30-day stress test. I need you to explain this so I can go do it this afternoon.
Path 1 is an immediate action. Within the next 30 days, honestly, do it this week before the March 20 protests hit. You need to sit down at the kitchen table and pull your last 12 months of actual milk checks. Calculate your exact average daily hundredweight shipped. Then run a brutal stress test. Model what happens to your cash flow if your mailbox price comes in 30 cents worse and then 50 cents worse than your hedge implied for 30 consecutive days.
So translate those cents per hundredweight into hard dollar numbers for my specific herd size, just like we did with the barn math earlier.
Exactly. You need to know your number. Once you have that hard dollar number, look at your upcoming cash flow plan. If a $15,000 or $20,000 sudden unexplained drop breaks your debt covenants or means you can't pay the feed mill, you need to book a meeting with your agricultural lender immediately.
Don't wait for the surprise.
Do not wait for the milk check to bounce in April. You walk into the bank this week and say, look, here is what these Mexican border scenarios look like for our cash flow. If this pipeline breaks and my co-op passes the cost to me, what do you need to see from us to bridge the gap? Proactive conversations beat reactive panic every single time.
I love that. Control what you can control. What is path 2? This looks like a medium-term strategy regarding the co-op.
Path 2 is push for a written co-op playbook. If you are committed to your co-op and you want to stay with them, you need to demand aggressive transparency. At the very next member meeting, or even in a direct email to your field rep today, you need to ask for an exposure map. Ask them point blank, what exact percentage of our total solids go to Mexico? And more importantly, what percentage of our milk moves specifically through the vulnerable bridges at FAR, Laredo, Juárez, or Nogales?
And if the co-op executives or the field reps can't even ballpark which bridges carry your milk.
If they don't know the physical route of their own product, that is a massive red flag regarding their risk management. You also need to ask them to state on the record their exact order of operations for cutting premiums if a border freezes. You want to know which plants pull back intake first. In what specific order do they adjust quality incentives and overbase pricing? You need to know exactly how they plan to socialize the loss before the loss occurs so you can plan your own finances accordingly.
That brings us to path 3, which is another medium-term move. Align your risk advisors. I talk to my broker all the time about where the market is going. How do I need to change that conversation?
You need to force your brokers and advisors to look past the digital screen. Ensure they are discussing basis moves when pipelines jam, not just CME price fluctuations. Your hedge strategy might actually need a new internal trigger. If the gap between your hedge implied price and your actual mailbox check widens beyond 30 or 50 cents for 2 consecutive pay periods, That should be a massive red flag.
A signal the pipe is broken.
Yes. Your advisor should be helping you track that basis drift so you know when it's time to start asking your co-op those hard questions about pipeline issues.
That makes perfect sense. The broker shouldn't just sell me a policy and walk away. They need to monitor the physical efficiency of my milk check. Finally, path 4 is long-term positioning. Treat Mexico as a high beta outlet. We define high beta earlier as highly volatile and prone to sudden swings. How do I apply that to my long-term business plan?
Before you sign any new long-term supply deals with a handler, and especially before you take on millions in debt to build a new barn and expand your herd, you must apply a realistic risk haircut to your long-range margin expectations. You have to intellectually recognize that what we used to politely call occasional rough patches at the border are no longer occasional.
They are the new normal.
They might now be highly predictable seasonal political events tied to trade negotiations. You have to aggressively price that physical volatility into your expansion plans.
If I don't factor in the pipe risk, my 2027 business plan is basically just crossing my fingers and hoping that nobody in Chihuahua decides to park a John Deere on a bridge. And hope, as they say, is not a risk management strategy.
It certainly isn't. You have to build margin buffers that can absorb a closed border, or you are gambling your farm's equity on international trade politics.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave everyone listening with a larger philosophical question to mull over while you finish up chores today. Consider this. If 1 out of every 6 U.S. tanker loads relies on overseas transit, and the dairy industry's massive $8 billion processing expansion is banking almost entirely on a customer whose front door can be chained shut by a few parked tractors, are we building the future of American dairy on a geopolitical fault line? If the pipe never fully stabilizes, cash flow management on the family farm is going to forever change from a simple math equation into a geopolitical guessing game.
That is the exact reality we are facing. This has been another deep dive from the Bullvine podcast. For more straight-talking, no BS industry analysis, make sure you head over to www.thebullvine.com.
Subscribe wherever you listen to your audio. We are out with new deep dives every day, and our upcoming topics will be digging into crossing-by-crossing export flows and analyzing how different co-op structures actually absorb and distribute border stress. Keep your eyes open, watch your basis, and we will catch you on the next one.